Alrighty. Hi, it's Chris from Airwindows. I'm like a minute or maybe just a couple of seconds early. I'm going to pop the chat out and open it up so that hopefully I can get it on my screen, and then we are going to commence to the best of my ability. So, chat window sits here. There it is. And that will do. Hey, David. And Bo. Alrighty. So we are off with a few folks. And I think I'm going to pause my monitor screen a little bit. So hi. As of yesterday, I released Capacitor 2, and that was an unexpected thing. There's also a bunch of changes afoot that I will bring you up on, and a project that I can let you in on that I can do today on camera. So that will be suitable, I hope. The thing as far as changes that I think I will need to bring up a couple of times, or maybe just make sure to mention it again at the end, is I'm not going to be able to continue with the Minecraft thing that we've been doing. So anybody who wasn't doing it, I guess you're all fine with that. If anybody was doing it, I can only apologize. It's not something that I can continue. However, I'm doubling down on some of the work side of things, and we'll make do. So yeah, one of the things that I would like to do is continue in my the sort of Led Zeppelin project, and for that reason I'm going to show you something. I got a snare drum. Obviously I can't play that too loudly in this room here and against this vocal microphone. So I'm going to have to be cautious. This is some kind of weird junker thing. I'm not even sure what it is, but that's an ambassador snare head in the bottom here. The snare head is a lot lighter. You can see it has a little damping thing in here. And what you can do with those is you turn it this way to loosen it, and this way to tighten it. And if you tighten it really hard, you'll get another effect. And what we're going to do today is take this apart, or at least take the top head off, and line it with aluminum foil like it was a John Bonham kick drum to see what we can get out of it, see if we will get a different sort of tone quality out of that. Because I have to wonder, if the guy was into doing that on his kick drums and stuff, you wonder whether it's like, oh, this is the secret drum that I bring in for playing in the studio, and that is also, like the kick drum, no other kinds of damping, but it has that aluminum foil in there, which I've learned has a unusual and signature damping quality. By that I mean it sort of adds a degree of rattle as it's being displaced, and then as it stops being displaced, it's taken some of the energy out of the system, but then it's not furnishing any damping any longer. And internally, it's a lot more reflective than you would otherwise have. So I think that's perhaps a kind of a signature sound. And we were fooling around by basically doing this, patting it. Or indeed, because I'm going to remove that damper in there. And you can also so you're taking one of these out. Taking another one out. And what you get when you do this, which is another drummer trick, is you can see the rest of the drum is tensioned, but this part here is all wrinkly because the lugs have been removed. And what you get out of that is hold it like a violin, right? If I forget to do the mute properly, I'm going to blow you guys up. Gotta be careful. I will literally show you how I'm applying the aluminum foil. I've got all the relevant parts right here. I thought that might be a nice thing for me to do today on the stream, seeing as I got to do something. And this was something that I was needing to do, so this is a fine time to do it, I thought. Normally you tighten lugs in a pattern. What you do, oh, look, coffee. You normally tighten lugs in a pattern because you're trying to keep the tension on the head even. What I just did in removing two of the lugs completely is the opposite of that. Oh, I believe you that something weird is in the universe now. As far as I'm concerned, the job for anybody who wishes to take this as a job is to survive it. And I can but try. I have been suffering a lot of losses recently over things. Yeah, I did. I talked about the aluminum foil for kick drums, and I also tried putting it on my tom-tom and was very pleased with what happened, which is why I'm trying this on the snare drum. Although logically, it is much less likely to have a big effect on this snare drum, but we'll see. There's a number of possible results out of that, because the thing about it, snares are tensioned much higher, and if you tighten the drum way up, you're less likely to make a big sort of impact in the head. You know, like the snare drum, the stick hits and goes. This is the kind of thing Hey, you can make some samples out of this. Check it out. The more it squinches in there, the more it's going to shoot air through and displace any aluminum foil that is in there. If it was tightened up so tight that stick just bounced straight off of it, you'd make a loud sound, but I feel like low frequencies are more likely to displace a ring of aluminum foil. High frequencies, maybe not so much. I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out. We're about to find out. Science. If you know what's going to happen, it's not science. And I have choices to make as far as like which tape to use as well. Or how much tape to use, rather. Okay, so let's see now. I assume that my levels on the mic are okay, or at least they're okay when I lean in. Also, I have a point to make here. This is a neat trick. If you're interested in having a snare drum with a really live and open sound, this is a timpani head. You might not be able to read it, but it's a Remo timpani head. It's for rototoms. This is what they sold for rototoms, and I think it's still kind of hard to get a hold of, so that they would sound like actual timpani, so it'd be all ringy and stuff. And if you're familiar with how drum heads sound when you sort of rattle them, this is fairly light. It's not quite diplomat light, but it's lighter than an ambassador head. Andy, hey, yeah, I have bad news, Andy. I don't think we're going to be able to do Minecraft stuff. I am both happy and very unhappy to see you show up, because this is not great for you. But you might not be completely out of it, but there's a problem, and it affects the time that we've been spending on Wednesdays, and there's nothing I can do to help. So ask, and I will try to set you up with whatever you need around that, but I'm not sure there's any good answers there. So I'm using a screwdriver and removing this. Bottom line, and I'm not going to say this repeatedly, so I'm going to say this once, and you'll have to listen for attention. And I can't help it if other folks that have been playing along with us aren't there. The folks I was playing with were way more pilled than I thought, and I was way more bread tube than they thought. So we got into a fight, put it that way. We got into a fight, and it is kind of not possible to fix. I had no idea, and they had no idea where we actually stood, and it just ain't good. So there's nothing I can do about that. That's some serious stuff, like world event stuff is serious stuff, and you can't always just say, well, you're my friend, so therefore I need to be able to argue you into believing what I believe. And I'm not willing to do that. Anybody that was willing to do that failed really hard. And we're not going to get into a lot of details about that. To some extent, it's a thing about parting friends, and to some extent, it's kind of not, and I can't get into that. So yeah, and this is tough. Like, I have lost a brother already to this sort of thing, and now I have lost the only close circle of friends that I have that's not Airwindows. So, not great. Things are not great. I'm going to see whether I can't double down on work and do that. I could talk about not casting judgment, but that's kind of the whole point, and it is certainly not unilateral. No. Andy, I don't love Minecraft. It's these friends that I loved. So that's the thing. But yeah, like, we're not doing that. Like, I honestly don't give a crap about Minecraft if not for that. But I do oh god, I'm knocking my glasses off. I'm really losing it, right? I do value our live streams, and I am going to be working harder towards trying to get some of my other stuff up and rolling. And we'll just see. Like, there's stuff that I do in the community that all came from that I could conceivably get back into, specifically saying, like, this is not with an agenda, this is just because there's no reason I can't still put this out there. And it's kind of like, it's survive time, folks. It's survive time. I don't know who else has been going through stuff. I know in some cases, like the immediate family members coming over all are on the enemy's side, and you will do likewise. I know lots of people have had that experience. I'm far from the only one. But it's survive time. It's possible that if we survive things and hang in there, that eventually more clarity will come. I can't guarantee that. I wish I could. I thought I could, but then things turned worse. But it is still possible that when all things blow over, you sort of get down into your bunker and fall back on stuff that you care about. And there are a lot of people who don't need to be on front lines of things. I am better off not being on front lines of certain things. I'll go to, there is a blog that I go to called Balloon Juice that's a fun place for yelling about politics, because it's a blog. That's what it's for. That's what it's about. And it also lines up pretty well with how I see things. But that's the thing, is I have often erred in being frontlines guy, being in the middle of some kind of argument, seeing something go on that, by my value judgments, is deeply and terribly wrong. And then I need to be the one getting involved. And that's not necessarily great. It's not necessarily a good idea. So I'm contemplating that. It's like, maybe it's better for me to focus on my little tinkering with aluminum foil and building snare drums and plugins and stuff. It depends. If all hell broke loose and the war came to my streets, I would be there. No question about it. And I know exactly where I would be siding. But I'm living in a little town in Vermont. It's not necessarily, so maybe best I stay out of the fight. Anyways, one of the things I'll be doing now is working on this drum. And yeah, as far as checking the compressor, you definitely want to check capacitor too. Maybe that was sort of my higher powers little bribe to get me through all this. It's like, well, that's really tough and you're going to have to deal with it. But tell you what, you can have a good plugin and go with that. So thing about it is, and one final word, Andy, I told you to follow our, your mutual friend for a reason. And you don't have to, you can acknowledge, well, hey, people can disagree about important stuff. This apparently is somebody that disagrees with Chris real hard on certain things. Doesn't think so, but never mind. So one of the things I need to do here is, I bet you do, David. That's the thing. And I fully believe what you say about it's usually not worth it. Thing about it is, what we need to do to make this work. Maybe I'll move this stuff over. I've taken the lugs off. I've taken these parts off, which is another kind of damping. And yeah, funnily enough, guys, one of the things, obviously I am going to suggest not drinking if you can manage it, because me being the recovering alcoholic and all, I just find it very easy to see that as not of the good. And that is largely something that my crew that we used to spend time with on Wednesdays, we kind of had that in common. They weren't doing that. So here's the deal as far as the aluminum foil thing. What I need to do is take a piece of aluminum foil that stretches all the way around the inside of the drum. I'll be unrolling it in here. Cut it to about this wide. I could actually cut the entire roll, but there might be more aluminum foil here than I need for it. And I'll come up with, I think I showed this off. This is the double-sided tape that I used. And it says Frost King Thermwell Products Company. It's for taping vinyl sheeting onto your windows so you can insulate them. It's very thin and doesn't have a lot of weight or additional damping. It's like a plastic that is sticky on both sides. And I'm going to run that around the inside of the shell. Probably just on the, it could be down the middle, or it could be on one of the edges. Technically it could be on both of the edges, but the thing is, like, it needs to poke up in certain places, and so you kind of want to have it stuck on in a way where there's a cylinder of tinfoil that is not strapped down, because you're not laminating it to the shell so much that it's literally forming another layer of shell. Instead, it's got to be loose in there, but not so loose that it's not also attached to the shell, because you're flexing it in the air against a fulcrum point. That's how the damping works. The damping works by, like, this part is loose in the air, this part is clamped to the shell. When sound pressure comes in, sound waves come in, and the flexing of it is what causes the damping, because aluminum isn't super springy of a material. Aluminum is kind of dead. There's not much of a clang here. So that's the next job, is get a strip of aluminum that goes around the thing all the way, and that is the right thickness. And I think I have enough aluminum to do this. See, this is what it sounds like when it's not crumpled or anything. This is going to also be part of the sound. You're getting that kind of rattle. I don't believe it needs to be completely unruffled like this. It'll end up being a little more crumpled. But when you have it built into the actual drum and taped on there, the parts that are, like, not all crumpled when you hit the drum, you're going to get some of this. It's an additional rattly sound. And as you can hear, it's kind of loud. Oh, I'm not going to throw a handful of lentils in. I think we're good. I'm not sure you can see the drum. You're doing this. Let's play it. You can kind of see it. Okay, good enough. And this is where we've got to. So the next thing is to switch it out and find out where the seam is going to be. I'm really using up almost all of this aluminum foil, but not quite. So there's what's left over. Also, by the way, as a sort of peace offering or whatever, one of the folks, a couple of those folks actually have given cast off graphics tablets because they are artists. But I also sent off some microphones that I've replaced. I had this condenser mic, and now I have a much nicer condenser mic, and I sent off a condenser mic this morning. And a couple of my Airwindows SM57s, because just like, yeah, be doing stuff that's not super toxic is basically the thing there. And I can but do likewise, or try to. Oh, the coffee. So yeah, next stage is I scrunched this against the edge of the drum. So this is about as deep as it goes, like from here to here, maybe a little bit less. The rest is going to end up wasted, sadly, but I don't have anything else to do with this tinfoil. Maybe I'll think of something. Oh, like put it near in my rototoms or something. And that would be neat if it works. Maybe it will. Might be worth a shot. Like if you have rototoms, there are these spokes, and maybe I can like wrap the aluminum around some of the spokes and it'll damp it in some interesting way. But for now, I'm cutting a little short of this line so that I can make a liner that, oh yeah, those guys are jamming on Ninjam, and I never got into it. I'm constantly pursuing my own stuff, but I did end up learning how it works, and it seems pretty cool. So there is that. I think I'd need to have like a virtual instrument of some kind, or a better way of getting my rig, the analog stuff, in, because I'm not set up really for it. But it's a surprisingly long piece of aluminum foil. Oh, here, have some more samples. There you go. Alrighty, so putting that over there, and so the next part of doing it is getting the double-sided tape, and yeah, you totally should. I'm just sorry I don't have like a real-time capture going on for that, but sample it off of the stream or something, because it's another kind of noise. I never got into doing a whole bunch of synthetic stuff and then putting out samples, although I still intend to put out the bass samples. I do have a capture of that, and it's like a solid hour of playing sustaining notes on the bass in a variety of different ways, all a set of calibrated loudnesses, playing methods, stuff like that. I feel like I need to do the actual developed. What's going to happen is I'm going to do the actual probably EXS instrument. I'll be trying out the Logic sampler thing and seeing what I can get out of that. Hopefully that'll work out. And if that works out, then I can put out a Rickenbacker bass that you play through Golem, the plugin Golem, because one side of it will be a DI, the other side of it is an amp, and all of it is basically designed to use in that way. And then once I've done that, I will upload the entire sampling session onto SoundCloud, so that it can be downloaded at full 2496. And stranger things have happened, David, and some of them were much less pleasant than jamming with fellow crazy musicians. I get very hung up on, like, my music is not right, and that's not your problem, that's my problem. Like, the reason that I've been really frustrated with the music, and in fact have stopped for a couple of months, although I've been picking up instruments. Like, I think I showed something else I did not show you guys. I have a couple of changes to the Telecaster. Oh man, it's so heavy. This Telecaster was so hated by the people who sold it to me. It was for super cheap. You can see how horrible and rusty it is. But I took a file and a little wood carving kit and scalloped the fingerboard. Not a huge amount, just enough so that it's like it has absolutely huge frets, and if I do bends on it, if I bend or vibrato on it, it no longer drags on the fretboard, it's only on the frets. You don't need that much scalloping to do that. I also did this. I took a jack plate off of a Dean guitar that I had and moved the jack out to here. It was one of those little recessed ones, so that I could use this patch cord, because this patch cord on the Les Paul lets me sit with it without it like poking into something. And so now the Telecaster does that too. And then yeah, you'd have tell me what you mean by backplate, because I'm not understanding. But the this other guitar that I got, which is some kind of horrible monster guitar neck, You can see it's all incredibly beat up. I don't even know what happened to this neck. It's like it got attacked by termites or something. Or somebody put thumbtacks all over it. It's crazy. There's like holes all over it. But the guy in the music store the guy in retro music who sets up guitars just felt like scalloping it. And he scalloped it so crazily that it's like a sitar. It's completely impossible. Which makes it more uncomfortable to play, but it played wonderfully. I don't know what it is, man. I mean, that's why that was on a junky instrument that was just a random pile of junk and cost me about $150. I always value stuff like that. Those are the instruments that I like. I'm not going to be the guy who ever ends up being like, this is my $10,000 Les Paul. It's like, no, this is my $200. I know, right? This is my $200 monster guitar that happens to be wonderful. The Telly is real interesting because, and it's also notice the strap is coming apart. This is my roll. This is my jam. That's how my stuff works. Now let's see. Oh, you must have seen. As far as attaching the neck to it, I don't know what that one does. That's probably also why it was insanely cheap, is that it's a monster. The thing is, it's a wonderful monster. It is... crappy neck. See, this must be what you meant by backplate. And these pickups are very microphonic and weird and kind of low impedance, but it gives them an amazing sound. That's the thing. Sometimes, like the wonky stuff, the wonky sound is... Oh, I think I know what you mean. Oh, yeah. Well, heck, guys. Yeah, now I understand what you mean. I have a screwdriver for working on the instrument. Let's see. I will take my guitar apart for you. Nothing that I wouldn't already do constantly. Let's take the back plate off and see what it is. I'm thinking one of the things we're going to see is a lot of point-to-point wiring. Yeah. Okay, that's cardboard. That's not anything like shielding or whatever. This is cardboard, and it looks pretty rough, but everything about this instrument is hilarious in that way. And this is the inside of it. So there's not much, and it's not necessary. You could get access to this just as easily by taking the front plate off, but there it is all the same. You can also see that these are unshielded wires, which is kind of... Modern guitars don't like doing that, but that's probably part of the reason why it has the tone that it does. It's just bare wires going everywhere. That was cool, but we didn't learn anything important. We'll put it back on and... Honestly, guys, if I was going to sit in on something like a Ninjam, it would be as a guitar player and not a synthesist. My work on the synthesizers and modular stuff, I'm way too hung up on doing it a certain way. But I can sit in on anything on guitar, especially with the pedal board being how it is. So that might be a thought. Sit there. I am rebuilding my pedal board, so a lot of my stuff is like in a state of flux or just not functional. I rebuilt the pedal board and bolted down all of the, well, not bolted, I Velcroed down the controls and things, and now I have to build cables for it all. But I do have power now. And here's what I'm going to be doing for the cable. The company that I use, Gigrig, for my switching is fond of these things. And this is their fancy pants cable, but I got it directly. It's from a place called Evidence Audio. This is like solid gold. It's ridiculous, but you know, only have to do it once. The pedal board stuff is sadly the literal opposite of everything I'm trying to do with hardware hacking, in that rather than being like accessible and affordable, it's like stupidly inaccessible rockstar stuff. I think that it's being marked up insanely, but the quality of it seems to be right. And I have some notions as to why that is. Like these Gigrig Quartermasters are guitar foot pedal switches. They are also really expensive, but they are these neatly arranged, like I think, mechanical optical things that drive relays, gold-plated relays. So the switching of the pedal board with those, everything sounds absolutely immaculate. It's perfect. And the reason that they like the Evidence Audio cables is partly because the jacks take up very little space, and partly because the construction, they've got this solderless construction thing going on, where I can show you. Like, this is what a really, really expensive patching system looks like. It's a stupidly costly guitar plug. Like this is like 4 times the cost of a Switchcraft, but it's solderless. And here's how that works and why it would matter. When you have cables plugging into things, and by the way, as far as the Andy, as far as talking about making amp sims or not, capacitor 2 was a big step towards me being able to do that convincingly. It was a lot of help. Doing that is going to be a big jump in me being able to go forward in that direction in the future. So we'll see. Now here's how this solderless connection works. I'm taking this part off. It's just a simple cap. You can see that there's a little stray wire here, and then it gets squished in. And when we take this part off, we said that we got this, and then we got a little pointy end that has to go all the way down to the end, and inside this is a little cup, which, if I'm not mistaken, is like there is a sort of taper to it. It's very delicately made, this. You can't just get these. They're all like machined and stuff, so there's a reason they're so insanely expensive. But when you put this together, and you're presumably going to be putting it together straight and then bending it over, you strip stuff and make it like this. You put it in, and then you stick it in good and solidly, and then put on the cap, which adds further pressure, which means that you're forcing a bunch of pressure between the center conductor of this wire, and it is a it's good enough for now. It is a bare copper wire. It's fairly hard copper as well. It's not super bendy. Yeah, I get you. Have to clean it off again. And that's against this steel part. In audiophile circles, there has long been concern about the tonal characteristics that you get between like soldering stuff with regular solder or soldering stuff with silver solder or different kinds of solder, the different metals and what's happening to the sound. And in some ways, the cleanest connection you can get is just straight metal to metal contact that is solid and making a connection. That's how something like a relay works. That is how plugging the guitar into the thing works. And inside the jack, the point is to have it be putting on enough pressure that it's not going to come loose or wiggle or rattle or something like that. And the way this is constructed, that's actually possible. So what we have is a solid enough connection of both the hot lead and the ground in several different places in it. I'll have to make note of exactly how much was stripped on there. Being held in place just by the metal of this stuff and no solder at all. And that can be the cleanest sound as far as that kind of stuff is concerned. Which may or may not be a big deal. It's very much the same thing as like dither. Like if you were talking about whether you have a good enough kind of solder in your guitar cables or in your interconnect cables on your high-end stereo system, that's going to be very much at the same level as if you were choosing whether you're using the right kind of dither. If not 16-bit, then maybe like 24-bit dither. The kind of thing where if you had to shoot it out and like tell every single time, then you maybe have a real problem doing that. But in a switching system, which has like 10 different possible effects, this is the biggest switching system that Gigrig does, Quartermaster 10. There are 40 connectors. 40 connectors just to have them all hooked up. So you can see that you're passing through a lot of these connections. And if there's a sound to the solder or whatever, it builds up. And this is probably how they noticed that building solderless connections that were actually reliable was desirable. You'd set up the whole pedal board, get everything going, and go, oh hey, that sounds way better than it should. And it's a nice little discovery. So let us get back to the drum making for a second, while I also have a look at the chat and stuff. Oh, David, the EHX Microsynth VST. I can't promise that one right away, that's for sure. But yep. And the thing about you guys were talking about the scalloping, like that mine on the Telecaster is relatively minor, but the guy that did the Stratocaster just went completely over the top and made a ridiculous scalloping that looks like a sitar. It depends. Heck, I'll show you. Let's find out. Easiest way to find out. Here's the guitar. Here's the fretboard. And if down low is going to be easiest, and the G string is going to be easiest, so Listen to what happens when I start squeezing on it. That's just pushing down. So as you can see, if you're playing a chord and you scrunch down too hard, you can completely ruin the chord. And this is why people don't normally like heavily scalloped fingerboards, is it can throw your chords off seriously if you're scrunching down on the chords too hard. It needs a light touch. And I think I told you that I ended up with the idea on the zero crossing. I ended up with a cursory sort of idea on the zero crossing, but it wasn't enough to go forward with. But basically I'm just waiting for the enlightenment of like, oh, that's how you do it. And until that happens, I don't have enough ideas. So yeah, Andy, you're absolutely right. It does bend. And it can screw up your intonation playing chords and stuff. So people often dislike scalloped fretboards for that reason. That said, if you're playing guitar and vibratoing a note or whatever, it is going to make your vibrato and bends all the more responsive, because even the pressure down onto the fretboard is also doing the same bend effect. So it makes it like, especially when you play with light strings, as I do, kind of Jimmy Page school playing with light strings, when you need to put a little pressure to bend it in some kind of way, the heavily scalloped fingerboard is just more responsive that way. It lets you put nuances in, and you hear and feel the note responding to you, rather than having to sort of scrape across the fingerboard to get anything done. So that is the thing. I'm probably going to end up scalloping literally all of the guitars that I ever have, possibly excepting acoustics. Because the thing about it is, here, more demo. I got this one together after a bit of delay. This is the body and the pickguard and stuff that the heavily scalloped neck came with. You can see it's all chewed up. But this neck is the guitar neck that I grew up playing. It's had the tuning machines replaced with 3 on a side, and I did that when I was a little kid. It has a brass nut which is not spaced perfectly, and I grew up playing that as well. And it's like super glued on there and stuff. So my fingers naturally want to find these two strings closer together. Go figure. I'm using Ernie Ball like extra light slinkies, the pink ones, the pink packages. And if you look closely, you can see that when I was a kid, I subscribed to Guitar Player magazine. And there was all kinds of stuff like Mark Knopfler influenced my playing with fingers, but then there was also a sound sheet, so a record included in the Guitar Player magazine, just this thin sheet of vinyl that you got, and it included Yngwie Malmsteen's Black Star. And all of that kind of stuff, and his insane solos. And it was the feature on Yngwie. Black Star is still like practically the only thing that I absolutely love of his. Although there could be others that I just don't know about because I have not pursued it all that much. But that's a really early one off of his Rising Force album. And they made very plain, like, oh yeah, this is what he's doing. He's got the Stratocaster and he scallops the fingerboard so he gets a more violin-like vibrato. And I went, cool. So you can kind of see, especially up top, that it gets up to being very heavily scalloped. Down low, not so much, but it still kind of is. So yeah, these things that we start off with have a great influence, really. Oh yeah, the Flexi records. So while we're tinkering away on stuff, I'm glad to see that the dismay of ditching the Minecraft thing is blowing over reasonably well, because I ain't happy about it. There's not a lot that I can do about it, I feel, and it's not meant in malice or to ruin anything or anything like that. So I just assume that I don't know, that not be that big of a deal. Time to put the tape in. Frost King weather stripping tape, double-sided for holding plastic weather stripping on. You can see it's sticky. What you do is you stick it on, and then once it's stuck on, you peel off the other part. So I'll demonstrate that now. Firstly, the sticking on part. So it winds up being kind of like this. The weather stripping kind of slipped down there. And then it looks like this. And this is also a good time to stick it down again further. Because this part is supposed to be stuck real hard to the inside of the drum. And then we're going to take the other bit off and put this in. What we're going to do is take the other side of the tape off, put this in here and sort of squinch it up against the tape. That's the next step. So one thing at a time. It'll wind up being pretty seriously crumpled aluminum foil by the time we're done, but that's correct. That's not, it doesn't have to be kept like smooth and rattly. It's acoustically, it will be vibrating. We hit snare drums good and loud, so it will be vibrating real hard. So that's what it looks like when it's peeled off, but the transparent part of it is still stuck on. LQ2, I don't plan to upgrade bus colors to work with console 5 and console 6 exactly, although you can always mismatch stuff to see whether you like the result. Bus colors in particular, because bus colors will never perfectly match with a console bus plugin. It would be used in the channel slot, and you can always mismatch them just to get a different result. The point of the dedicated console things is that if you use those, and certainly if you use those and they're the right kind, if only a single sound is playing through, then it cancels out perfectly. So the idea there is I can define a kind that's not going to change the sound, but if you're looking to manipulate the sound, there's no reason to not just experiment, to try swapping stuff out, seeing what it gets you. So here's the plastic backing from the double-sided tape. Now you can kind of not see it so well, because it is clear, but it's there. And we stick this in and start positioning it. If any of this scrunches up against the edge of this, it'll stick to the double-sided tape anywhere it touches. And that's just, oh hey, here's the sound effect. Wow. I also want the aluminum foil not touching the actual head. I'd like it maybe not sticking out beyond the rims here, like tucking underneath the rims. Not so tightly that it's just laminated against it. The fact that there are lugs in here, the screws holding the lugs on, will help. But I don't want any of the aluminum foil touching the actual heads once I'm done. I did not have it touching the heads on the kick drum or the tom-tom either. So I'm going to start by flattening this out a little bit. It might even leave a bit of a gap. And I'm choosing to sort of set it over the lug parts, but this strainer stuck out farther, so I poked that through the aluminum foil. Now, the other strainer doesn't stick out nearly as far, so we're accepting it. Basically, anything that's poking out too hard, I'm absolutely going to... In fact, maybe I will poke it through the... These lugs, if they stick out too far, I can just stick them through like that. And I will continue as I go. And it ends up kind of like this, where this is kind of loose. You can see that it is able to move around, but it's stuck down at this inner point where the tape is. And then it doesn't really stick out past the rim inside here. Can kind of flatten it out. But I would not want to be like taping it down at the edges or something. The idea is that vibrations, sound energy, can move this around. And the damping has a great factor. I'm tucking it under the edge again. I want it to get the way that I want before putting the head back on, because once the head's back on, I can't really reach that stuff anymore. And I think we're about ready. So there you have it, a John Bonham style aluminum lining, but rather than on a bass drum, this is on the snare drum, which is possibly something he also did. We don't know, but I'm going to finish this up and then we'll hit with the stick and see if it sounds familiar. See if it sounds like anything you like. If you know the sound of, say, I don't know, Stairway to Heaven or whatever, that intro drum fill, the crack has a really interesting quality. I will talk into the aluminum foil inside snare drum once I get the top hit put on. But my voice is not nearly loud enough to actually move the aluminum very much. It's rattling the snares, that's a whole separate issue. Here's our timpani head. I like to line up the little Remo crown opposite from the strainer. That way if it's sitting on the drum thing and the little Remo crown is at the top, then I know the strainer is at the bottom where I can reach it. I have also, I forget it was who I heard, but I remember somebody talking about how one important thing about vintage drums versus modern ones that don't sound as good is the vintage drums sometimes had very light and flimsy rims. They're still metal, most likely, or at least the type that we're talking about. This is still metal, but it's lighter and will affect the sound a lot less. And I've experienced, I have some die-cast rims that I put on snare drums as well, and it changes the sound so much. It's unbelievable. Makes it a lot thinner and crisper, but somehow lacking in character. And the stick has a huge amount to do with the snare sound too. That is a very important thing. Certainly as far as Bonham was concerned, if that was what you were going after, you need to use heavy sticks. You're never, ever, ever going to get a Bonham-style sound out of light little jazz sticks. This is a Steve Gadd stick. It's a Steve Gadd wood-tipped stick. The tip of the stick has to do with the sound that you get on cymbals, as well as the regular drum, but certainly on cymbals. And these are kind of like medium light sticks. They're not super light. And they have the taper matters, the kind of barrel matters, the shape of the barrel matters. All of these things matter. It's super interesting. This is definitely turning into the drums Q&A because drums are super interesting. And if you're looking to get particular results out of them, it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. It's a deep and interesting rabbit hole to get into. This is some kind of steel snare from the 80s or so, and it is not the same kind, but it has some things in common with Stuart Copeland's Tama snares. And one of the reasons I was so pleased to find it, I was like, oh hey, this is going to be good. because it has that steel shell. One of the things about a lot of great drum sounds, look for the acrylites. Look for a particular color. What you see in this snare is straight up a steel shell. That's not even necessarily the most common metal snare that you can get. I have another snare drum that I've used a lot more. This is a recenter acquisition, and it is a bad quality but also fairly heavily modified 1960s Keystone Badge Ludwig Acrolite. Acrolite is not like Black Beauty or something. It's not one of the pricey, fancy boutique snares. Acrolite was kind of like, well, you can be a student and you can get that, or you can get marching bands or whatever. A lot of people ended up having acrolite snares. The deal with those early acrolites, Keystone Badges and one, those are aluminum snares. And they can also be Ludwig Ludalloy, which is mostly aluminum. Not entirely aluminum, but a lot of aluminum. They are lightweight and they have a special kind of resonance and a special sort of kind of bark. It's more like an arf than a bark, really. Rather than being like a railroad spike driven into your head, they're sort of like that. And the acrolite gives you a very different thing. My Ludwig acrolite, it's got one of these dampers on it, and then I gave it a second damper on the snare head. And I set them up so that they're sort of just barely touching the head, so that the vibrations against the pad, it's not like the pad has to be squishing really heavily against it. Proximity to the head is also going to damp it, while letting some of the high frequency stuff carry on. So I've got this acrolite, which is already fairly sharp and clear. Like it's a quick attack in a sort of more woody type sound rather than steely metallic type sound. And like the reason I got that acrolite was because I was doing some research, as I will often do, and I was looking at the Pink Floyd movie Live at Pompeii. I had it on VHS tape. I still do, in fact. I've got a DVD of it now, but I had it on VHS tape, and to my ear, the sound of Nick Mason's snare drum on echoes as it started to kick into the heavy beat section in the middle before the freakout area. When, I'm not sure if anybody's seen that movie, they're panning around behind the speakers towards showing the musicians again. It's dum 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 dum. The bark of that backbeat to my ear was the best thing ever. And I needed to have that snare drum. And I studied it like crazy off of the VHS tape, trying to figure out what it was, and going, that does not look like one of these. That's metal, but that does not look like one of these. If y'all want to, I can run upstairs and grab the acrolite and show you. It looks like a silverier color. What the heck is that? And I worked it out. It's one of the many examples of a Ludwig acrolite snare. They also come in sort of painted or anodized colors, so that it doesn't have to only be the sort of 60s Keystone Badge, silvery aluminum color ones. You can get mojo out of plenty of them. It's about the type of metal alloy rather than zeroing in on really specific things. But they just have a distinctive bark to them and have showed up in a lot of amazing drum sounds, gotta say. I think some of Bonham's stuff was also a Ludwig aluminum snare. Not necessarily all of it. So what I'm doing is I'm rotating this around and seating the edges and sort of tightening the screws bit by bit. And this is now super loose, so I'll shut off the boost here so that I can hit it with a stick and show you what it sounds like really dead. You can get a good sound, like, I'm not sure if you recognize that tone, but you've heard it. This way of setting up a drum was used on classic Tom Petty albums. It shows up in some of their classic albums things, like the Damn the Torpedoes. They were working with a guy who was much better on drums, and they were using the Tom Petty drummer at the time because he was too necessary to their sound. Like, he wasn't the best drummer in the world, but they stopped sounding like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers if they replaced him, so they had to use him. But they didn't like the drum sound that he got, so they're working with, like, I'm forgetting the name of the guy. I should remember, but I don't. I've had many things to think about in recent weeks, so whatever. But they're working with this guy who was really good at getting sounds and really good at getting... Oh. Hang on. Okay, now we're back. I forgot to turn it back up again. Sorry about that. It didn't cause... I just forgot to turn the switch. Like, I've got this switch, and it's a pad switch, and if I do this, then that's like literally a physical switch. Sorry about that. What was I saying when you lost me? I'm thinking, I was talking about, I'm not sure how much of the Tom Petty stuff I was talking about, but I might have said literally all of it with the buried in the sound thing. So here's the deal. You've heard this sound before. The sound of the totally slack, like I showed it to you. The totally slack and limp drum head. Because that is the sound off of some of the classic Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers albums, such as Damn the Torpedoes. The way that worked is they were working with Tom Petty's drummer. He's not the best drummer in the world, but if they if they replaced him with anybody, they no longer sounded like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers anymore. But they were also working with a engineer, a producer whose name I don't remember. I wish I did. And he's a big name guy too, that they were particularly excited about because this guy knew how to get drum sounds. And what they did was the producer guy was like, okay, we're going to get you the most killer drum sounds. Here's how. First of all, you're going to loosen up your snare drum until it's completely slack. And then pat it. And then kill the volume. And put everything back. See, now that producer Jimmy Iovine, yeah, and also the engineer. And yeah, that the engineer is a big deal. I think he was part of that. So this is what they did. That's the Tom Petty snare sound right there. I just turned it down enough that I could actually hit it good and loud. That's the thing, is it is so loose that you get a big bassy whoomph in there. And then it dies away real fast. Now, they weren't necessarily using the aluminum foil lining. That's something that I'm working on right now. But all the same, That's a drum setup thing that you might not know if you weren't also watching Classic Albums DVDs with me. And it's useful to know. And one of the reasons that you know that's the case is because part of the story around it is the struggles that they had in coping with it. Because when you do that, the snare drum feels like a pile of mud. Like you're hitting it, and then it's like you have to drag the stick back out of it again. There's no bounce. It's totally dead. There's no bounce. So that is one secret drum trick that I get to bring you as far as talking about this stuff. Now that I've done that, let's start moving towards the seeing whether I've got the secret bottom trick here, because he used fairly slack heads, but not necessarily on the snare. The snares were tuned a lot tighter than that. So I'm kind of going across, like every step of the way. I'm moving to another lug. And then after tightening one, I tighten the one on literally the opposite side. You can also listen to the tone. For instance, I might want to listen for how the pitch goes up. And each time tension it until the pitch goes up a tiny bit. Because that's also going to keep fairly even tones. As far as John Bonham and the room sound, one of the things about Jimmy Page's engineering, because he was deeply involved in the production of his stuff, is that he liked using multiple microphones and ambient microphones, room microphones that were picking up things. And he was not particularly fussed about like, well, let's timeline everything and make it all line up exactly the same. No, he was going for effect. So it's like the comb filtery thing of mixing a bunch of microphones together in weird ways and wanting them to basically reinforce, unless they didn't, unless he wanted to do something else. And the when the levee breaks sound is completely unlike everything else that he's done. That is a very different kind of sound. So, although the when the levee breaks sound is Beyer ribbon microphones, or a Beyer, I don't remember whether it's just the one or whether there's multiple ones, but it's Beyer. It's a Beyer ribbon, probably a 160, if I remember correctly, which possibly I don't. But I do know that it's a Beyer ribbon, and it's hung in a sort of open entryway stairwell place over the kit, and that's how they did that. Back to the drum. I think what I'm going to do is go for a Stewart Copeland sound next. So let's take a moment. Having that degree of ring, is part of the bark of the snare drum. But if you get into a Stewart Copeland thing like around the Synchronicity album, that's very much beyond that point. You can tension a snare head, so much that it starts to choke, that you're no longer getting that ring out of it, and it starts to act like a marching snare or something. And that's your classic Synchronicity era Stewart Copeland. Also, I don't know, a whole bunch of other stuff. Like if I can still turn these with a finger with the side of a finger like this. Or keep remembering you can't necessarily see what I'm doing. Then it is not nearly as tight as it could be. Like this head will not stand literally taking a wrench to it and tightening it down that much. Although I had to replace these parts where the screw goes into because I was tensioning it up and a bunch of them started breaking. It was a sort of a garbage snare from who knows where, and it had a whole variety of different drum parts in here, and some of these were a cheap metal and it was snapping as I tried to tension it. It was not going to take a Stewart Copeland or even a normal rock and roll tensioning. I'm going to keep tapping this while I do it. I'm using one finger on that. Go ahead. What are you thinking about the tempo algorithm? That is getting close to me doing something about it, as in making a post about it. It's just kind of fallen behind because of all the other stuff that's going on, but it's ready to go. You can hear the note here is going up to like timbale. I don't think I'm going to break this head. If I did, I'd just get another one, but that's the thing, is you run the risk of making the head just explode by over-tensioning it. You're tightening it until it like hurts your finger a little bit to turn, or it's too hard to do it. You wouldn't want to use your whole arm because you just smash the head that way, but this is how you get the drum head that is choked so hard that you can't actually, it doesn't ring the same way. Once I'm finished doing this and show you, I'm going to untension it some because that's not the way I leave my snare drum, but I wanted to show you how this is done. As far as tuning the drums in the key of a sound, that's not really that much of a thing. Heads don't vibrate with the same harmonic series as a string. So you can tune the root note, but then some of the head overtones, like, let's see now. It's tuned so high you can't hear them. Anyway, this is about as tight as you'd need to. Actually, Stewart would have been going even farther, so let me see what I can do. I'm going to gently go around the edge now, because we've already got it tight enough that I feel the strain on some of these. And yeah, drums have pitch, absolutely. The thing is that the overtones of the head don't really make harmonically related pitches. That's why they sound like drum heads. So you can tune the root notes if you want, but part of getting drum sounds involves making like dissonant other notes that clash with each other and make a big sort of blur. You know, like there's a bit in a Rolling Stones book where a guy, I think one of the, like Mick Taylor or somebody, is asking Charlie Watts about tuning his drums because they just went through a song and a tom-tom is like ringing in totally a different note from what the song would be. And so, and this is like, Bo, this is like in a serious studio recording. This is the Rolling Stones in the studio. Guy's like, aren't you going to tune the drums? And Charlie turns around and he's like, why would I tune something like this? Once I hit it a couple of times, it's going to change anyway. Because he was playing loud enough where you're choking the note of the drum. You play hard enough and it's not the same deal. Like, I could see how maybe for something like Yes recordings, and I don't know, and I've read his autobiography, but I don't know if Bo Bruford was tuning his stuff to the songs in any way. They went to so many different notes anyhow that it's like impossible. But I do know that Bill didn't hit as hard. Instead, he did something else. I'll show you. So this is the Stuart Copeland tuning of as tight as you can get. That's making all of my acoustic guitars ring on the wall. Good and loud. Good and loud, that. So what I'm going to do is take it down a little bit, because I don't normally leave stuff at Stuart Copeland type. You can take just one lug down, by the way, although it's going to strain the head quite a bit, but listen to how much it goes. And now if I do the same thing, more of an explosive, unpitched kind of sound. Let's quickly go and take a bunch of them. Yeah, the more loose the head is, the more of an effect the aluminum foil ought to have. Listen to that. It's like two notes. I'm touching my finger to it to try to damp out nodes that I don't want to hear. When you get into people who are doing really careful tuning of the drum, in order to try to get the tension exactly right all throughout the head and stuff, what they're trying to do is get sort of the theoretical perfect arrangement of drum head notes. You can hear it going up and down a little bit. Hear that note starting to pop out? That's what you get out of a snare ring. It starts to happen in that way. And if we put the strainer on, this is starting to get open enough that we're going to start to get that Todd Rundgren, I don't want to work, I just want to bang on my drum all day sound. And that kind of stuff, ringing really hard. Or I can use this end. if I forget to pad that at some point, it's going to just about kill you guys. So that is a low, clangy kind of reverb. That's lower than I would use for a snare. You can hear the difference between that and the Stewart Copeland kind, which is really, really tight. People sometimes do stuff like put tape or wallets or stuff. There's things you can put on there like moon gel that'll damp it. So instead of getting this, you get I think Bernard Purdie famously is either the guy or one of the guys who would sit his wallet on the snare and demand payment. And he would say, okay, let's cut my tracks. You have to pay me before I play anything in cash. And I said, why? I put my wallet on the snare. If it doesn't have the money in it, it will sound wrong and it will be bad. You have to pay me ahead of time. So they'd give him like all of his money and he'd put it into the wallet and put the wallet on the snare, and the additional amount of money in there would be helping to damp it. And really it's just a way that he could manage to get paid rather than getting ripped off. It's pretty funny. So there are many ways of damping. Without the aluminum foil stuff in here, this would be literally a totally undamped sound. So what I'm going to do is pitch it up a little bit until I get that kind of high clangy ring without going beyond that to, I think, what they call plywood tight, the Stewart Copeland thing, where it's so tight that it's just choked. Because I am in search of your classic John Bonham snare drum bark. I want to find some of those tones where it's an amazing, sharp, fierce snare sound. I'm probably also going to have to unloosen some of the lugs while I'm at it. You make all of the lugs just a little bit too tight, and then you just take one lug and loosen it down a little bit, because what that does is, rather than having all of the nodes of the drum resonance, like there is a sort of three-way, you divide this into thirds and those vibrate, you divide it into quarters and those vibrate, and circular nodes in the center, there's like 2 nodes or 3 nodes across it. And if you tune everything up so that they're all perfectly vibrating the way that a tensioned head should, and then you loosen one of the lugs, you're screwing up the tension on the head completely and causing it to have all those nodes be wildly out of tune and into a burst of noise. And a burst of noise is what drums are supposed to sound like in many ways. They don't have to, but it's a very effective way of going about things. So that's starting to sound real clangy. It's not requiring much tension. And let's take a quick glimpse of this, and then I'm going to detune it, see where I go. And Copeland was using steel drums. Copeland's Snare was some kind of Tama steel snare. It's definitely not a Ludwig acrylite, definitely not a wooden drum. The drum that you associate with Stewart Copeland snare is a steel snare kind of like this, with a nice, relatively light, clear head on the top, tightened up so tight that it was like plywood and ready to explode off the drum. So yeah, let's hit this a couple of times, and then I'm going to unloosen the one lug and see where that gets me. I might as well also demonstrate another thing as well, which is this is real clangy. I can also demonstrate what a rim shot does, which those of you who are not drummers might not know what that is. The idea of a rim shot is both characteristics. I think a lot of Copeland stuff, because he would play with a matched grip, right? Copeland plays like this with his snare drum. It comes down like that off the back of the hand. And there's a certain swingy quality about that. He does it because it feels more jazzy that way. It's a jazz way of doing it. But it also means that it might be easier to get off a rim shot, which is, instead of the snare is bouncing off the edge. Yeah, let's pad the microphone before we do more of that. So, regular rim shot. So that's the difference between a regular hit and a rim shot. I think it was pretty clear. This is also one of the reasons why my drumsticks look like this. Bill Bruford was the master of rim shots as a backbeat. He often had it dialed in just right where lots of his stuff, it would drive engineers crazy as well. Lots of his stuff would be going off of the rim simultaneously. That means that the tip of the stick bounces more sharply off of it, off of the head, causing it to sort of chime out more. And the hearing the notes off of the snare is the reason that I detune one of the lugs. So we're going to give that a shot here. Yeah, my mic is fixed so you can hear what I'm saying. There's that ring. It's also a little higher than I like it. So and that's actually loosened so much that it's kind of dead. So what I'm going to do is loosen the ones around it a little tiny bit. Now listen to this. I hear two notes in here. Hear that? They're almost a half step apart. If the head was tensioned evenly, those would be the same note. Since they're different notes, they fight each other and cause the head to break up and freak out more. When I put the snare back on and wail on this again, I think what you're going to find is that although there is no damping left, it's not going to chime like a bell anymore. So let's give that a shot. Once more into the breach. I think we have a result. Bits of that sounded a little bit like the snare from Fool in the Rain. That think it worked? Again, this has been taking a snare drum doctoring it until it produces a fierce, fierce backbeat that has the suitable explosive quality. Oh, one further thing. The tightness of the strainer has a lot to do with things as well. Like, I can loosen this until it rattles real easy, or I can tighten it up until it's almost choking out. And that'll have a big effect on the tone. Which is good enough for now, I guess. So there you have it. That might be a result, and if it works out in recording, which I think it might, that might be my new preferred snare drum, although the acrylate is very nice too. But the ability to have that densely contained sort of bark, I'm sure you heard it because it's a pretty decent microphone, although I know I was distorting the crap out of it. This is a vocal mic. It's not really designed to take those sound pressure levels. The internals of it will have distorted even if the mic pre and stuff were turned down so far that they weren't distorting. But yeah, that is a possible thing. And the way it's done is partly through the trick that I did with the aluminum foil. I think it was doing what I hoped. But then the other part is all drum tuning. And it's about taking the drum head that could be doing a nice clean ring and manipulating what you do about that. Like you can tighten sort of the top 2/3 of the lugs and then let the other ones be completely loose, and it'll mutate the resonant of the head so much that it'll make a weird garbagey kind of sound. And that's been used as well. For instance, if I'm remembering correctly, and I think I am, the Steely Dan's track on Asia, Josie, is using a unusual kind of snare drum concept, which in that case, the snare drum on Josie, if I remember correctly, is a Ludwig plexiglass. It's a Vistalite snare, a transparent plastic snare that was just all tuned, all screwed up and wrong, just totally messed up. It's not making any notes. It's just kind of going blah. And with that, you wail on it hard enough with a stick, and you get a really striking sort of bark. And when the drum is set up super wrongly, and it's all messed up, maybe it has the aluminum foil trick in it, and maybe not, because that's not terribly common. But if the heads are all screwed up and not ringing nicely at all, just ugly, then the thing about it is you start hitting that loud enough and it makes a nice sort of self-damped kind of sound without having to put padding in there. And that's a useful distinction. So yeah. And I believe that is enough. What I'm going to do now is sign off and say good evening to you folks. I don't know if I'm doing anything this coming Wednesday, and just go to bed. I don't feel like trying to do a new special thing right away and be like, hey, yes, guys, I'm doing something really cool. It's like, nah, so we'll just kind of grieve a little bit on Wednesday and not do anything. But I'll be coming up with other stuff to do in future. Honestly, I'm still building stuff. I'm still setting all my stuff up and getting things ready. Getting stuff ready, like, camera setup, the that Sleepy Circuits Hypno thing I told you about at one point. Man, I love it how I have people who are in the chat who are going, yeah, I like and subscribe when I don't. That's loyalty for you, man. Love it. Yeah, I'll move towards bringing some more stuff out. I had already been thinking about that. It's just that now I need to, I don't know, recuperate a little bit, but then also dial in the stuff that's going to work for me. So what I will do is put all of my tools away, which I'll need to do. For instance, I keep this in this box. These fit in a rack that's screwed onto the wall with drywall screws. So I have a whole bunch of electronic parts in these things. You get them at like Michaels's and stuff. They're basically sewing and crafting tool bins. But yeah, I will be back, and I will have more plugins and be doing other music things, including music things that we can participate in. Honestly, maybe I will end up doing like Ninjam Wednesdays or something like that. I'll talk to David about it. David Pixley. Some of you guys would definitely be into that. And if I can get a way to patch through my guitar and have that be what I do, then that could be well worthwhile. I've never done it before, but we'll see. We'll see. Because I can't really bring my full compositional thing into a jam session, but I can sit into like any jam session in the world on guitar and get away with it. That could be a thing. Let me fire up OBS and goodbye to chat. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye until next time.